What's up guys? Today we're going to check out Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 on 4K. I'm not going to get into how good or bad the movie is, I'm just going to share some of my thoughts on the audio and video quality. Now let's go over a few tech specs. The movie was shot in 8K. It's got a 4K DI. It's rated PG-13. Runtime is 150 minutes. Aspect ratio is 239:1 and 185:1 for the IMAX scenes, and the audio is in Dolby Atmos. Before we take a look at the audio and see how active it is, if you don't know what the Atmos viewer is, you can find a link in the video's description that tells you all about it. You can also find a list of gear that I use for all these 4K reviews. Hopping over to the Atmos viewer, we can see that right from the start, this is a very active mix and it's a very static mix. The first song that we hear in the movie is Radiohead's Creep. The cool thing about it is that you can hear the guitar move throughout the front stage and the overhead channels as the camera pans around. I got to also mention that this is a Disney movie, so you will have to raise your volume up to get the soundtrack to come to life. Another standout is the battle with Adam Warlock, which has got really good front-to-back movement when he's flying in and out of frame or when things are blowing up in different speakers. And the movie's got a pretty spacious immersive soundstage for most of the runtime. There's always a little ambiance happening in the lower surrounds. Now I'm going to say that about 98% of the movie remains static for the most part, except for a handful of little moments. At 42:46, you'll hear these little things spinning around in the background, which jump through different channels up front. At 23:49, there's a cool little scene where you'll hear electricity zipping through the height speakers, and there's also an elevator scene at 45:16 where you'll hear this effect which is supposed to make it sound like the elevator is moving through different floors, so it's kind of a whooshing sound. There's a couple other scenes that last a few seconds that are really dynamic and whiz through all the speakers, but even for the big action scenes, most of the effects are static. That's not to say that this is another bad Disney mix, because surprisingly, it is a very active mix, which kept all of my speakers lit up for most of the duration, except for maybe the center surround. Now despite good surround activity, this being a Disney mix, the bass response could use a little help. The action scenes sometimes could feel a little flat, and even the medley of songs, which I know has good bass, wasn't always as lively as you'd expect it to be. Sure, you can adjust your subwoofer level along with the main volume, but that's not something you should have to do if you have a calibrated system. That being said, with the volume turned up, there are scenes with heavy, impactful bass. When the high evolutionary ship takes off and the explosions blow up, the amount of bass actually shook my room. I didn't feel that it went super low, but it can hit really hard, and you'll get this with a lot of the major action scenes. If you're new to the channel and you're in home theater and want to keep up with the latest and greatest in audio and video gear, be sure to tap the subscribe button for new weekly videos. And I would also like to thank all of my Patreon and YouTube member subscribers for supporting the channel and making this purchase of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 possible on the Kaleidescape, so I can bring you, the home theater movie-loving community, this 4K review. If you want to join Patreon or the YouTube membership, you can find links down below in this video's description. Video quality-wise, I found it to have a soft, almost film-like look to it, so I'd assume that they either added in some digital grain or maybe the lenses that they used gave the picture a soft appearance. Because if you're thinking, hey, this movie was shot with an 8K camera, it's gonna be ultra crispy and detailed. Well, that's not the case. It's still a great looking movie and shot with a specific aesthetic, but if you're someone that wants that 4K razor sharp crispiness and that clean digital look, you might be a little let down. Although, if you've got a 16:9 projector screen or if you're watching on a television, this movie does keep the IMAX scenes intact. I read that it's about 45 minutes of full screen footage. And remember, this wasn't shot with real IMAX cameras, it was shot with IMAX certified cameras. Now whether or not the 4K physical disc will have the full screen shots remains to be seen, but the digital version as well as this Kaleidescape version does indeed have the switching aspect ratios. As for the HDR, the movie's got a muted color palette. Tonally, it's the darkest of the Guardians movies, and visually, this definitely reflects that. There's a lot of grays and blacks and darker hues throughout. We get some lightness during the alternate Earth portions of the movie, which come across natural if not a little subdued with greens and blues. And the scenes in the orgoscope have some nice pop as well, since most of the shots are mostly whites, oranges, and pinks. I'd say that this is probably the brightest part of the entire movie. There's some decent specular highlights from lights and reflective surfaces, and the explosions do have some good brightness. However, there's nothing that's really going to push your display's nits to the max. Black levels can look raised at times, while other times they're pretty deep and contrasty and play well with the brighter highlights. Overall, this is a really good looking movie with plenty of detail. It is a bit soft, so it has a film-like feel about it, so if you're a grain hater, you're probably not going to like it. So I'm going to have to give the video an 8.1. For audio, Despite the lower volume, this is one of the better Marvel mixes with plenty of surround activity and bass that can actually kick pretty hard. I'm gonna go with an 8.9. Keep in mind that this review was based off of the Kaleidescape version, which has a file size of 84.5 gigs, so this might mean that the 4K Blu-ray might come on a 100 gig disc rather than a 66 gig disc. But this Kaleidescape version should look either the same as the disc or better if the disc is a smaller size. The audio would be exactly the same. So what are your thoughts on Guardians 3 in 4K? Have you seen the movie, and if so, which one do you think is the best in the franchise? Leave your comment down below and let me know. Now, if you do want to pick up this movie, I'll leave some links for it down below in this video's description. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you want, you can follow us on social media, and if you want to support the channel and get exclusive content or great discounts on audio and video gear, then stop by our Patreon page. Be sure to like this video if you found it useful, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you again in the next video.